Hey, how's it going? Thought today we might do a little shop tour. You want to come along? We'll head into the shop and check things out. So I think most knife shop tours generally start with the grinders. I don't have a separate grinding room. I keep everything pretty open and then kind of blocked off by area. So let's start with my grinders. I have two 2x72 belt grinders. Both of them are made with the Polar Bear Forge kit, and this one is actually made to flip to the horizontal position, and it spends most of its time in horizontal. Small wheel attachment, you know, got the VFD speed control. I think is crucial for knife making. Here's a bunch of different size wheels and work rests, flat platen. I do have the Jerry Moen system, and I find it to be outstanding. Eliminates any belt slap that you get, you know, when you go over the splice. So definitely that's a worth buying for sure. Here's my second Polar Bear Forge grinder. This one is mounted to the bench in the vertical position, so it stays like that. And this is usually where I have Jerry's platen mounted up. Moving down, I got I run a 2-disc system, one in the horizontal and one in the vertical position. They both run off the same VFD, and that VFD is actually set up to switch between the two. So I have this little two-way switch here that lets me move between the two, and then that one VFD runs both of them. Pretty handy setup. This disc, let me shut this light off, it's a little bright. This disc actually has the Nielsen disc system on it. You can see all the filings are kind of stuck to the magnets, but basically it allows you to change the steel hub on the face without pulling paper off. So you can, you know, there's a couple more discs sitting there stacked up, different grits on them. Really a handy feature to have. The grinder itself is mounted to the bench by the foot of the motor, and then it has the Beaumont work rest, which is attached to the front of that 56C frame, and then the Nielsen disc. So it's cobbled together, but cobbled together in a way that makes it probably one of the most versatile disc grinder setups you could put into your shop. A little parrot vise, that's pretty useful for some things. Here, back here, tucked in behind, you can see these are the jigs for the Moen platen system. You can see the big blade jig doesn't get a lot of use in my shop. This is an even heat KO 18, I believe, with the Ramp Master control. I know a lot of people like other brands. I have not had a single issue with this. The temperature, the couple times I've checked, has always been very accurate. And it does everything I need it to do. Woodworking vise with quench plates set up, little toaster oven for heat treating. Got to have a separate thermometer for toaster ovens because they are so inaccurate. And I guess we'll just sweep around. This is a Boyer Schultz 612 surface grinder, manual surface grinder. I used to have this back over here between the refrigerator and that grinder, and I ran it off the same VFD I run the grinder on. But I moved it over here and hooked it up to my normal 3-phase, which is run by this rotary phase converter down here on the ground. And it's just plugged into the same circuit that all my 3-phase tools are plugged into now. And this one has a homemade belt conversion that I built several years ago. Electromagnet. And, you know, not a whole lot to say about it. It's been a good little grinder. Made a lot of knives on it. But one thing I did find, you know, my shoulders are pretty messed up from my military service. And racking this thing back and forth all day is just, is really hard. You know, if you're doing 4 blades in a day or something like that, surface grinding them is tough. So a few months back, I picked this up. This is a KO Lee 618, so 18-inch traverse. Didn't really need the length, but when you get into a hydraulic, they're generally a little bit larger. And this one's nice. This is a 2-axis hydraulic, so it has the regular traverse and the cross feed are both hydraulically controlled. And then it's got coolant on it. I would have really liked to have gotten a Z-axis down feed, but that just was, you know, that was a luxury I couldn't afford. So this was local. I got a good deal on it. It works really well. Did some cleanup and a couple repairs on it, and it's been really solid. So pretty happy with that. We'll just keep sweeping around. There's going to be a lot of detours in this shop because there's a lot of different areas for work. Kind of my machining area, my lathe. This is kind of a legacy piece. I had this back when I was building motorcycles and motorcycle parts. It's way overkill for knife making, but it's a great lathe. It's really accurate. I can do real accurate work on it. I changed it over. I still have a 3-jaw and a 4-jaw chuck for it. And I think I have a faceplate somewhere also. But most of the time it just has this 5C collet chuck on it now because I'm doing, you know, almost everything is 1/4 inch or smaller. So I hardly ever need anything large. And it's just safer doing close-in work, you know, filing by hand on small parts and things like that. It's a lot safer to use a 5C collet than to have, you know, the jaws of a 3-jaw chuck swinging around there. So pretty happy with that. You know, a little knockoff Aloris tool post deal. Been a really good lathe. And so we'll just keep moving around. It's my drill presses. Let me back up and you can kind of see. I have 2 Craftsman 12 inches and a Wen 12 inch. I've only had the Wen for, I don't know, maybe a few months now. And of course I upgraded the chuck. It's got a Albrecht chuck in it. And I've been pretty happy with it. My rule on drill presses, so I also have a 15-inch floor standing drill press there. My rule on drill presses is they have to have a Morse taper in the spindle. So basically the 12-inch is about as small as you can go and still find a Morse taper spindle. And the reason for that is that, you know, like in the case of this drill press, I run this Tapmatic in it. And I needed a way to mount that, you know. And to me, mounting a Tapmatic, you can get them with like a 1/2-inch shaft on them. But you put that into a chuck and then the length gets really long and you're decreasing your accuracy, your runout's getting really bad. And so Morse taper spindles are important to me. And I will also say I've been pretty happy with those Craftsman. I've had them for several years. But I bought the Wen specifically because of the depth stop. This depth stop system is superior to the collar type like Craftsman has on theirs. These little spin collars where you loosen up the screw here and you turn the collar, those things are right next to the definition of garbage. So another quick tip, really cool idea. I may have come up with this on my own. I don't remember seeing this from anybody else, but I started doing this, man, probably 15 years ago, is a 1-2-3 block on the table of the drill press. And so you can see it's got a small hole drilled in it, which I use when I'm getting up close to the edge on small work. And then I can also move it over and larger drills can go down through the holes. And I use this, and these are rigidly mounted. They're bolted through from the bottom. But I use this setup on all of them. And the nice thing about them is you put a shoulder, you know, something with a head on it, and that gives you a stop. so you don't have parts spinning out from you. And I have it on, you can see I've got it on all three of these drill presses. There's my drill index. You know, I use a lot of different sizes. It's nice to keep track of everything. Before we move on to the mill, we'll just take a quick look at some of these tools. So here's a surface plate, small, I don't know what this is, maybe 9x12 surface plate with a height gauge on it. And that's what I mostly just use that for scribing the edges of blades for grinding. And you just got, you know, machine tool stuff. Things like, oh, I don't know, what do I got in here? Laps, I use these laps for lapping pivot holes, some collet setups, and things like that in here. It's all end mills, some reamers, mostly end mills. Tap drawer. And materials. The rest of this box is all materials. So this is mostly synthetics. This is steels. This is Damascus. This little bin is Damascus from other people. This is my Damascus. There's some meteorite right there. Nice stuff. And then, you know, wood blocks. I think every knife maker has drawers like this. And it's the same stuff all the way down. The obligatory stereo system. I mostly use, actually in this shop, I just pulled this out of the house when I upgraded my home theater and put it in here. It's got Bluetooth, so I stream Audible books through this, and it allows me to read while I'm working, you know, listen to the books, and it's been fantastic. Lathe tooling. This one is just all kinds of lathe tooling stuff in there. And it's located right behind the lathe. So, you know, I'm working at the lathe. I got a lot of my tooling and stuff set up here so I can just turn around and grab whatever I need when I'm working back and forth. All right, so back to moving on. Here's my mill. This is an actual Rongfu brand, RF45 or whatever they call it. I've had this thing for like 10 years and I bought it used. Previous owner had put some holes for dowel pins in the bed, but they've never been an issue for me. I just blow them out with air every once in a while if they get some chips or stuff that's sticking up. But I added the you can see the DRO, the optical. So I added the DRO to it, and I added the servo drive down there at that end. And it already had, you can see it's got the power down feed on it. And it already had that Z-axis DRO on it. The previous owner had put that on it. And then, of course, it didn't come with the Kurt chuck, so I added that. But it has actually been a fantastic machine, and there's no way this machine hasn't earned its cost 20 times over. And it's, you know, honestly, it's probably not quite as sturdy as an actual Bridgeport, but it's done everything I've ever needed it to do. It's never bogged down. It is 3-phase. I think it's a pretty big motor, probably 2 horsepower. R8 collets. And I've often thought about, you know, it'd be nice to have a Bridgeport, but honestly, I don't know, other than maybe getting variable speed, you know, if I got a VS, there's really no reason for me to upgrade. And I can put my money elsewhere. So, you know, upgrading the mill would be a nice to have, but certainly not a need for me. I do have a lot of tooling for this thing, you know, that I've bought through the years. Of course, everything is kind of covered up by something else, but there's a super spacer that has a 3-jaw chuck that goes with it. You can see I've got an indexer back there, a little 5C 3-jaw. And moving on. So this tool cabinet right here is where all my mill tools are. Of course, I use the top as kind of my catch-all. You can see some different size cutoff discs that I use for cutting lock bars on my folders. I think those come from Enco. Those are 15th thou thick. And these are some nice little 25 thou Moors. And then inside the box, just kind of standard stuff. I got some snap gauges for checking inside diameter. This is my, let's see if I can get this open with one hand. My Blake centering finder. This is a gauge block set. I bought this right after I got the Moen Platen for doing stack ups. So basically on the Moen Platen, the folder blades, they kind of just clamp on one side of the blade holder, and you need something to fill the gap on the other side. So I can take these and make a stack up that's equal to the thickness of the blade, and that way the clamp tightens down evenly on both sides, the blade and the Joe block. And then, just, it's full of tooling. This thing is, you got a high-speed spindle back there. You got some 5C collet blocks. This is a magnetic sign plate right here. Some fly cutters, V blocks, just same, I mean, if you buy a mill, you're gonna find you need all this other stuff. And it just kind of keeps going that way. There's some collets. I haven't used this stuff in a long time, but if you're gonna grind blades and store them, this armor wrap is like an oil impregnated paper. It's really great for stuff like that. And another drawer full of 3-jaw chucks and dividing plates, all kinds of stuff like that. Okay, and then, you got to have lots of parallels. I have 4 sets of parallels because I used to have a CNC machine that was a pallet changing machine, and each pallet had 2 Kurt 2-position vices on it. So I used a lot of parallels. Those days are gone, but I still find them really useful. Use them for all kinds of things here in the shop. This is my socket head bolt organizer. I picked this up from a local hardware supply store that was just looking to get it out of their facility. It was taking up space. I guess it was NOS or something. And so I had them hook me up on that. And it's great because you can, pull out the drawers and you got everything ready to go. They made up these little signs for me. And so I'm almost never without the hardware that I need. All right, so here's the Deckle. This is a GK21 pantograph. Let me back up, get a better view of the whole thing. This is how I do like the contoured backs of the bolsters and fit them up to the scales. The machine, when I bought it, I got a really good price on the machine. Immediately had to rebuild the spindle, so then it was an okay price on the machine once I factored in rebuilding the spindle, which I think was close to $1,000. But after that, just a little cleanup, and it was working really well. So I've been really happy with this. I made these sub plates, and both of these aluminum sub plates are done with Mix 6 aluminum tooling plate. And then everything on the sub plates is held down using basically a dowel pin system. So there's inserts in the sub plate and then a bolt insert. So there's threaded hardened steel inserts in the dowel plate, and then these dowel pins register in hardened sockets inside the fixture plate. And that gives me some repeatability, allows me to take stuff off, put it back on, and it's just going to register in the same place. And we'll move on to this table. I actually built this table years ago as a reloading bench with a tabletop that my brother-in-law gave me. And now it's overloaded with all kinds of stuff, none of it for reloading. This is a larger surface plate. I think this is a 18 by 24. You can see what it mostly gets used for, flattening things by putting paper down on it. This is my my Servo micro drill. This thing is awesome. It was really expensive, used, and absolutely worth every penny. If you've got the money to buy one of these things and you make folders especially, highly recommend. Because it's basically a drill press slash freehand mill in the form of a Fordham hand tool. I mean, it runs up to 17,000 RPM. If you look, right now, I've actually got a 1/8 inch grinding stone in there. And here's a bunch of, I mean, I've got just tons of stuff for it. I run really small twist drills in it and cut-off wheels, just all kinds of different things. The Cratex, this is a, let me grab this. This is a Cratex rubberized abrasive drum. This is what I use for jeweling the inside of my liners. And I just chuck it up in this thing and go to town. It's a little hand tapping head. I use that for blind tapping holes. I modified it on the top here to be able to add like a torque limiting hand drill or something, but I actually find just doing it by hand works best. This is a little router table setup that I did. I think that's got a it's got a Cratex abrasive in it right now for cleaning up the back sides of the tang area on folder blades. And then coming around, this is my engraving station here. This is a home-built graver sharpening system, and it uses a magnetic hub, which is very similar to the Nielsen system on my disc sander. Difference being I had to make all this, but basically these metal diamond discs just pop right down and they're held on by magnets that are pressed into the back of that disc or that hub. And it's got variable speed. It's a 1/8 horsepower DC motor. And then, you know, real quick through this, this is a, I don't know how you say, a Meiji microscope. And there's a cheap ball vise and homemade stand. Actually, I modified a roller stand, an in-feed, out-feed stand to support that base plate. And yeah, there's not a whole lot to say about that. Still learning how to engrave. Hoping that by the end of the year I will be engraving on some of my own work. And another little toolbox for engraving equipment and tools. And let's see which direction we want to go. All right, we'll go this way. Steel racks. I used to do a lot of fabricating, so I used to have a lot of steel on my racks. I actually cut these down. I don't keep as much steel in stock. I've got rid of most of my structural and tubing supplies. Still got a bunch of, that's all TIG rod right there, and you can see some belts hanging on that. Those are those gator belts. I've pretty much quit using them at this point. So they're just sitting there taking up space. Horizontal bandsaw. I use this quite a bit when I'm cutting stock to length, usually not for knives, but jigs or like dies for my forging press, things like that. I use that a lot for that. There's a Harbor Freight blasting cabinet. Of course, I modified it. It uses a foot pedal system, and I put an all new gun and trigger and everything inside it, so it now works pretty well. And there's my main shop compressor. I use it for running the blast cabinet and air tools, but I don't really use it at the bench. Just it's been really convenient for me to have a separate compressor under the bench, and I'll show you that in a little bit. That door goes to the bathroom, which hasn't worked since I moved into this shop because it runs off the well, which hasn't worked since we moved into this house a couple years ago. It's on the list of things to get done, but it's not very high on the list. So this is kind of my chemical station. There's my my ferric etching tube. Got my ferric chloride in there. I got some ferric mix with white vinegar in that one. That blue stuff is for etching or putting a patina on bronze. Got some other containers with ferric in them, and those are for actually etching bronze and copper, separate ones for each. Power supply for anodizing. This is my anodizing electrolyte, and got some multi-etch there. And that's pretty much it on the chemical side. Down here is those are my gold plating chemicals. I can use the same power supply to do gold plating, so do that. This is kind of like the garage here. This is where I've got all my equipment that I don't really use very much. A lot of fabricating equipment here. Just stuff that doesn't see much use in knife making that I used to use all the time when I was building motorcycles. Now we're in the forging area. Let me back up. You can get a look at how the forging area is kind of laid out. You got the forging press right there, and then I've got a chop saw here, and then up here is my forge, and you can see the anvil, and I've got this vise right here, and that's kind of all I use. Usually what I'll do is I'll open this bay door up and I'll push the forge outside, and I'll hook up the propane tank over there and fire it up, and I'll have it right outside the door, and I can just work between it and over to the Uncle Al's press, Riverside machine. And let me just say, I've been really happy with this. You know, a lot of people have asked me, emailed me, or messaged me and asked me what I think of this thing. And, you know, his dies aren't great. I've pretty much made all my own die sets, except for the Texas wind pattern and the laddering dies. I use those. But all the others, the flat dies and the drawing dies, I've made all my own now. But this thing works really well, and if your steel is at heat, it has no problem really pressing it down and drawing it out. So I highly recommend this press. I use a 100-pound anvil. It's all I've ever needed. You can see if you were making really big blades, you might want something with a little bit longer face on it. But this has worked really well for me so far. And my forge, you know, same one they use on Forged in Fire, so it's got to be good, right? It is a Majestic 3-burner. This was the deluxe, I believe. I've done a lot of modifications on it. You can see I've put some shelves up. I've done this draw out support on here so that it'll support my handles. You can see that it's got a shelf on the back for holding fire brick also, just to close it off and let it get hotter. This thing will easily get to welding temperature for carbon steels. I kind of doubt it on stainless steels, which is why I have an extra compressor down there, because that tank is going to become a blower type forge, forced air. All right, more to see. You kind of a layout view of the shop from over here. It's where I'm going to shoot some tabletop videos. You can see I got the video cameras set up there, and everything there is mobile. The table's on wheels, the camera stand's on wheels, a little support cart there on wheels. So I guess we're coming around to the lapidary section. So this is my Covington rock saw. This is a 16-inch saw used for slabbing off material. This is a stone grinding multi-grit setup. It's got 4 different wheels. It's variable speed, and you can see it hasn't seen a lot of use yet, but there is an intent. Over here is my diamond bandsaw. This has got a fair amount of use. I use it for mother of pearl, and I've cut some carbon fiber and things on it, but mostly right now I'm just using it for mother of pearl. But the intent with buying this is to cut stone for stone inlays. So there'll be more of that to come. There's my Thumbler's tumbler. That's, I think, the biggest one that Thumbler makes. Haven't used it a lot lately. Kind of got away from that style of knife, but it does work really well. Little conference table. We have knife maker get-togethers here every month, so got to have a table for everyone to sit around and BS. Here's a chop saw. This is a cool little sanding thing. Eventually I'm going to get it set up on a nicer workbench. But this model machines, this is a miniature drum sander, and I use it for thicknessing my scale material. So basically, you just, when you turn it on, you slip your wood. Well, that sounds bad. Anyway, you push your scale material up through here, and there's a sanding drum inside that lets you bring it to thickness. And that gives you a nice parallel surface, front and back, on your scale material, so that when you're putting your knives together, everything is even, and you can contour the edges of the knife and count on the scales being flat, so you get nice true edges. It's pretty micro adjustable. I think there's hash marks here on the adjustment, and I think each one is maybe 25 thousandths. I don't really use that. Radial alarm saw. Here's my TIG welder. You can see I got a flux core welder underneath there. That's a hypertherm plasma cutter. Used to use it a lot. I still use it every once in a while for like ripping up bandsaw blade material for Damascus. This is a high-speed buffer. I've really quit using it. It's not really very safe for knife making. And being a large high-speed buffer, you're really at risk. So it pretty much just collects dust. It is for sale if anybody's interested. This is the buffer I use all the time. This is also a high-speed buffer, but I have it set up for only using 4-inch wheels. So basically using a 4-inch wheel on a high-speed buffer gives you half the surface speed, and it makes things a lot safer. I've never come close to feeling like I had anything going to be ripped out of my hands, even using a loose wheel like that. So, a quick walk around, just mechanical tools, sockets and stuff like that in this toolbox. Paint storage, chemicals, junk, whatever, a lot of supply stuff. You can see there's a box of nitrile gloves and several cans of spray adhesive, just things you use all the time, kind of stored in a central location. Shop press. This is my metal cutting bandsaw. And I started out using one of those handheld bandsaws like everybody else in a swag table, and it served me really well for a long time. The one thing I didn't like was the large amount of exposed blade, and I always felt like that was really dangerous, and if I ever slipped, you know, I could leave fingers sitting on the table. So having something with an adjustable blade guard, I think, is really important, and if you can afford it, then it's a good idea in terms of safety to go ahead and upgrade to something like that. This one it's made so that you can switch it between high speed and low speed for steel cutting or for wood, but I have another bandsaw for cutting wood, so I just leave this one at low speed. I have this little riser block that I use. It just makes it easier to hold on to small materials, which is mostly what I'm cutting. And then it does have, I put a halogen light on it so that I can see what I'm doing there. Another toolbox for just mechanic type tools. There's wrenches and stuff like that, screwdrivers, that kind of thing. This is part of my sandpaper storage system. It's just a distribution box, letter distribution kind of deal. And I just keep my sandpapers on here. They are, the way I keep them from getting contaminated is they're all stored face down with the coarsest grit at the bottom and the finest grit at the top. I think I have 1000 grit up here at the top. And I never use the top sheet. So the top sheet on these you can see is really dusty, and that's because that top sheet's been there for probably 4 years. I always pull the sheet underneath the top sheet out. Might make sense to make some little thin cardboard or plywood covers to lay on top of each one, but you know, you got to decide what your priorities are, and that's not one of mine. So this is my wood cutting bandsaw. I use it for resawing scale material, things like that. I've got a cool little scroll, like industrial scroll saw. Don't use it very much in in knife making, but I did use it a lot for woodwork and also pattern making for the Deckle and things like that. This is a 12-inch disc. Couldn't tell you the last time I turned that thing on. And there's a little 1x42, which I also haven't used in probably 5 years or more. I don't know. I haven't gotten rid of them because, you know, you buy tools, you never know, you might need them. But honestly, they're really just taking up space, and they're not really knife making tools. And then let's get to, this is my main workbench. I think we're nearing the end on this tour. You see my belt storage here, and these are just pieces of PVC that I made little end caps on the lathe and just screwed them into the side of the workbench. Lots of stuff just laying on this bench. It's a 4x8 sheet of plywood. It's actually doubled up 4x8 plywood. So it's got a lot of surface area. It tends to accumulate a lot of stuff. It's my Personalizer Pro that I use for putting all my markings on. It's kind of my sharpening area. You can see there's a Norton 3 triple stone or whatever they call that. You got the Edge Pro, or excuse me, this is the Wicked Edge. I do have an Edge Pro also. The Wicked Edge is pretty much what I use to finish every one of my knives. I'll set an initial grind, initial bevels on the belt, and then I'll finish it by hand. This is a paper cutter I use for cutting all my sandpaper. This is a grinder that let me talk about this real quick. This thing the motor is flipped on the base. So the motor spins the right direction even though the on switch is facing the wrong way. You'd have to think about if you flipped this around and put it up on your workbench, the wheels would be going up instead of down. So, but I liked this location. I find it really handy here, and it's got a couple of 3MD burring wheels on it that I use pretty frequently. This is a little knife vise I made. You can see the base is made with a little Harbor Freight deal, and then everything else is all scrap that I just welded together. And you know, my little jaws, they're not spring loaded or anything. I actually have to reach in there and pick the jaw up and slide the blade in and then tighten things down. But it works really well. It swivels and twists in all directions, so it works really nice. This is Sandpaper Storage. I think you can see each grit is marked on there. And 2500 is pretty much as far as I ever go. Occasionally I'll get into some, 3 micron or something like that for polishing after I've etched my Damascus. But these are all in here. You can see they're marked for different knife patterns. So these are all the patterns for my different models of knives. You got, man, files galore all over the bench here. And, this is a carbonizer right here, and the rest of it back there. The large wood box here is my hardness tester. It's a Ames Model 1 hardness tester. This is most of the hardware that I use all the time on my knives. My aught 80 screws, 256 screws, stop pins, pivots, all that I store in all of these. That's a shim punch. You can see some phosphor bronze shim material on top there. And this is my main workbench right here. This is where I assemble and disassemble my knives 40 or 50 times before they go out the door. This is a project that's underway right now. This knife is zirconium and marble carbon fiber with a Mike Norris Damascus blade. And right now it's waiting for me to, I'm going to grind the lock next, and then I'll scribe the liner material for the lock bar and set the lock and detent and get into finishing that one up. This toolbox is, man, it's full of so many little tools. I couldn't even go through them all. I'm going to be doing some Tool Tuesday kind of short videos, and maybe I'll start pulling some stuff out of there and showing things off that maybe everybody doesn't know about or wouldn't think of in their knife making, and kind of get you guys up to speed on some of that stuff. But this little organizer tray is worth taking a look at. This is, I know it's all covered with paper towels and stuff right now, but it's a nice little, they call this a soldering mat. You can order them off Amazon. I didn't come up with this idea. I got it from Delana. She posted it on Facebook, and I ordered one immediately. And they're great for organizing and holding small parts and small tools, things like that. And one of the things I do, I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not, is these little depressions here. I actually have it marked. The F is front and the R is rear, and then there's a left and right. So if I'm disassembling something, it's got, a number of screws that I need to keep organized. I know that, like for instance, this will be the left side of the knife, the rearmost screw, and then I can just lay them out towards the front and keep them in order. And since I mostly work with aught 80 screws, they fit right down in those things, and it's really nice for holding them in place. And that's about it. This is a little granite block or a granite plate that I picked up. It's just a drop from a counter. It's not super flat, but it's flat enough. And you can see that paper gets used a lot. I probably replace the paper on this thing twice a week. And anything that needs to be deburred or flattened, I just reach over and give it a couple swipes on this. So having something like this right next to your work area is pretty important. I think that's about it. I'll give one last sweep around the shop, and you guys have any questions or want to know any more detail about anything, feel free to ask in the comments. But that's 30 years of collecting tools and 5 years of knife making. And this is what the shop has become. All right, have a good day. Thanks.